Thank you, and on behalf of Baylor University, I'd like to extend my warm personal welcome. We're delighted to host this most significant conversation about the pursuit of wisdom and the purposes of higher education. And as Darren said, we're so grateful to have so many of you here. I'm particularly pleased with the wide diversity of disciplines and institutions represented at the symposium. Such a collection of speakers and participants point to our conviction that educating for wisdom is the responsibility of us all. The Baylor Symposium on Faith and Culture series embodies precisely the kind of Christian scholarly reflection that we believe is at the heart of Baylor's mission and vision. And this year's theme is particularly vital, both here at Baylor and throughout the academy. The psalmist reminds us that in wisdom, God made all his works, and the writer of Proverbs tells us that it was wisdom who was with God at the beginning of creation and through whom all was made. Wisdom, we are told, is more precious than rubies. It endures, shines brightest, and sustains us most completely because it points us toward the divine. Educating for wisdom, then, is sacred work, for it beckons us to discover the full richness of God's creation, to know God's calling on our lives, and to seek the highest of human goals. Educating for wisdom in the 21st century university is a high calling. I'm grateful to my colleagues at the Institute for Faith and Learning for planning and directing what I know will be a rich and rewarding conversation. May your time on our campus be thought-provoking, challenging, and inspiring. Again, welcome to Baylor University.
Before I introduce this evening's plenary lecture, I want to recognize that we have named this in honor of the W.H. Bryan Jr. family, a very special family and friends to us from Amarillo. And two members of that family, brother and sister, Bill and Linda Bryan, are here this evening. Bill is a former member of the Board of Regents. Linda is presently serving as a member of the Board of Regents. Bill and Linda, will you all stand and let us welcome you and express our appreciation for your support. Now it's my great pleasure to introduce to you this evening's plenary speaker, Professor Candace Vogler. Candace Vogler is the David B. and Clara E. Stern Professor of Philosophy and Chair of the Department of Philosophy at the University of Chicago. She took her undergraduate degree at Mills College in California, a doctoral degree in philosophy, a doctoral certificate in the program for the study of culture, and held a research fellowship in economics, all at the University of Pittsburgh. She has written two books, Reasonably Vicious and John Stuart Mill's Deliberative Landscape. She's also written scholarly articles on topics ranging from ethics and practical reason, her areas of specialization, to psychoanalysis, feminism, and cinema studies. She's currently at work on two other book projects, one that explores Elizabeth Anscombe's work on action and practical reason. Anscombe, one of the most profound moral philosophers of the last half of the 20th century. And another co-authored work with her colleague Jonathan Lear at the University of Chicago about ethics and psychoanalysis. From 2000 to 2007, she served as co-director of the Master of Arts program in the Humanities at the University of Chicago, and as such is an astute observer of the present state of higher education in the United States. Professor Vogler, then, is uniquely qualified to offer this opening lecture. She's someone who's devoted not only significant attention to the notion of wisdom, but also someone who cares and has thought deeply about higher education. Please join me in welcoming Professor Candace Vogler.
Thank you so much. I'm delighted to be here. It's a great honor to get to be part of this very important conversation. I do appreciate it. Okay. Sorry, I'm getting over a virus still. We have come together from many different places in order to think about wisdom. Some of us are faculty members, some of us are students, undergraduate students or graduate students. Some of us are university or college administrators, and some of us are just interested in or worried about the state of higher education. And so, thanks to the Baylor Symposium on Faith and Culture, we have an opportunity to consider the mission of universities generally, of Christian universities specifically, and of the place of wisdom in thinking about university education. Now, I have never been connected to a church-related institution, so most of my experience is with non-church-related institutions, and I'm drawing on that experience in this talk. You will probably detect some Christianity in there, in spite of the fact that at my university I don't talk about that very much when I'm teaching. But that's just a word of warning. It's not that I'm not attentive to the special mission of Christian universities. I'm very serious about it. It's just that that's not where I have a job. Okay, there is a lot to discuss. I mean, as near as I can tell, it has been hard to get a good undergraduate education in the United States for at least as long as I've been paying attention, which is since the 1980s when I was an undergraduate, basically. And it appears to be becoming more difficult rather than less. It's relatively easy in the United States to imagine that overburdened, misguided, or underinvolved families, inadequate or overworked teachers, indifferent or imprudent administrators, all of them alike facing serious financial, political, and cultural challenges, are to blame for the deplorable state of state-funded primary and secondary school education. Higher education, for better or worse, has no such excuse. Families tend to support children at university. University administrators in the States have to care about what goes on. Their positions depend on their institutions attracting tuition-paying students, winning competitive grants, and being able to rely upon alumni and community support for development. Why then is it so hard to get a good education at a university? Now, I suppose it's possible that some of the trouble is this. Prospective undergraduates can't be expected to know what a good university education will be. Prospective undergraduates apply for admission based on sort of inchoate ideas about what they will get if they pursue degrees at this place or that one. They really don't know what they're seeking in any detail. And if what they're seeking is an educational experience, it may be the case that they could not know in advance and in detail what exactly they were trying to get. One of the wonderful things about educational experiences is that they tend to be disoriented. You have to shift something, and it's very hard before you've had some of those to anticipate what having a lot of them over the course of an undergraduate career would be like. I take it that this is part of the reason that undergraduate admissions offices in our institutions tend to operate like teeny tiny marketing firms, and why a lot of the material that they generate geared to prospective undergraduates reads like ad copy, peppered with photographs of smiling youth apparently having a lovely time, talking on lawns or discussing things in classrooms or doing something a little indiscernible in a lab. Now, the parents of prospective undergraduates may not be in a position to offer good counsel and are anyway inclined to take very seriously what their children want. The parents of prospective graduate students, on the other hand, have almost no say in their children's educational choices, and where graduate and professional training is concerned, that may be a good thing. To some extent, what higher education can do depends in part on the decisions of people who are ill-equipped to judge what higher education should do. That may help to explain why it's hard to get a good education at university. It's hard to get something when you have only a hazy, sort of optimistic impression of what it is that you seek. And it's hard to advise others how to seek a thing that you may not yourself have ever sought or found. Now, we depend on our students, of course, but we can't expect them to lead us in this. It's up to the older generation, to faculty and academic administrators, to work out how to provide a good university education. I suspect that if we manage to do that, then our students will have some hope of getting a good education. And if we do our work well, then our students will have more to bring to the challenges that they will face in life, and we will have earned the alumni loyalty and community support so eagerly sought by development offices all across the country. I will focus on humanistic education in, as I say, non-church affiliated settings. In some ways, this will sound a little like the, on the surface of things, godless version of a discussion we had, very good panel discussion we had this afternoon on the crisis in the humanities. Education in the humanities does not require expensive pieces of equipment or still more expensive laboratories in which to house and use such equipment. Universities do not have to compete with powerful private sector firms in seeking to hire strong humanities researchers. As my provost, who is a physicist, puts it, the startup costs in the humanities are very, very low. He has to invest $2 million to add a faculty member in his field. Any four-year college or university in the United States could work toward providing an excellent undergraduate education in the humanities. And no matter what sort of lives our undergraduates seek once they have earned their degrees, the kinds of skills they should get from work in the humanities, skills in writing, in various strategies for reading, in discussion, in critical thinking, in formulating questions, and appreciating the kinds of considerations that matter in answering them, will help them. Beyond this, organizing the development of those skills with an eye toward what it means to be a human being and what it means to lead a good human life, one with another, cannot possibly hurt them. Most academic institutions could provide a good humanistic education, and most fail. And this is surely part of the reason that many of our college-educated fellow citizens do not think that humanistic higher education matters. If they took some courses in philosophy or literature or art history or music, cultural studies or comparative religion, then the chances are very good that they do not remember most of what they studied in those courses, and that the teaching of those courses mimicked teaching in fields where the point in the course is to convey a body of knowledge, not to acquire specific kinds of strengths or skills, and certainly not to do so as an increasingly more focused and active student of the human condition. It's very likely that most of them were asked to write some essays in such courses without ever being asked to think about the audience for essays of that kind. That is, without ever being invited to think of their writing as an act of communication with their fellow human beings. Discussion might have been interesting or not, but it won't have given them the experience of being a member of an intellectual community that was organized around work with particular texts or materials to the end of raising and addressing and beginning to appreciate serious human questions. At best, they may remember their humanities courses fondly as providing them with some experience of the finer things in life, some exposure to beautiful poetry, say, some familiarity with paintings or pieces of music, a passing acquaintance with famous work by famous dead people like Shakespeare or Plato. Now, I have no desire to downplay the significance of just being exposed to important cultural artifacts. I have no quarrel with conveying the bodies of scholarly and critical work that have collected around these cultural materials either. But this is nowhere near enough to demand from humanistic education, and nowhere near enough to offer to those who take courses in humanistic disciplines. But if not a sort of survey of critical and scholarly literature plus exposure to major texts, what? What is it we're supposed to be doing? I think this is a hard question made more pressing by an economic situation in which everyone knows the following four things. First, people need higher education in order to have a good chance of finding a way of making a living that does not grind them into the dust. Second, even with an undergraduate or even a graduate degree under these conditions, it is very difficult to find a satisfying career. Third, most four-year colleges and universities face tremendous financial and cultural pressures and are having to decide how to make cuts in what they offer or how they support their offerings at exactly the moment when people are looking to them to provide whatever it takes to help people have better lives or at least better prospects. And fourth, it is hard to find a direct link between specific regions of humanistic education and specific employment opportunities. So we all know these four things. These frame thought about sound humanistic education, and they frame my sense, some of my sense, of the challenges that we face as educators. Now, I'll tell you a little about me. I am a very lucky person. My father was very violent, thoughtful, lonely, and creative. My mother was scared. I am the oldest of 5 children, and we all were raised in the kinds of grassroots North American Christian churches where people rely upon church and family. In the churches we attended, many members of the congregation were afraid of intellectuals and worried that faith could not survive a good education. They thought that educated, thinking people were responsible for alarming social upheaval and instability. Now, I'm not a social scientist. For all I know, the anti-intellectual Christians may have been right about some of the sources of social unrest in the world around me. It's just that they didn't have enough faith that educated, thinking Christians could have anything compelling to say about the issues and events that galvanized social unrest and polarized many communities. And that lack of faith was, I think, an error. Now, my parents were different. They were in favor of education. We lived in a town with good public schools, and our home was full of books. In the midst of dreadful personal turmoil, my father had quiet times. He taught me to read, write, and draw before I was in kindergarten, and no matter how things were for him, he insisted that if I had a serious question, I could find a serious answer by reading, writing, thinking, and praying. Now, in a home where injuries keep children out of school a lot, but everyone always goes to church on Sunday, you end up with a lot of questions. It's just part of those circumstances. And that is part of the background for my remarks today. I am one of those people who wound up with a better life than she even could have imagined in her youth, because I just kept pursuing an education that could speak to a great big question mark right in the middle of her life. It was a question mark about human life, about how we should live with one another, about what it meant to live well, about what it meant to live a Christian life in conditions that were difficult. It's personal with me, this question about the mission of higher education. And I work on the assumption that all of my students, no matter what their backgrounds were like, have serious question marks in their lives too, even if they haven't figured out how to ask their questions yet. The rest of the background for my remarks comes from my job. I teach at a university that I actually love. It is a faculty-run university, and I have done a lot of administrative work there. For 7 years, I ran our Master of Arts program in the humanities. Our job was to work with around 120 MA-level students each year, each of whom came to us with an undergraduate degree, usually in some area of the humanities or the social sciences, to give them a 10-week core course that could take them from what they had got as undergraduates to what they needed in order to do strong work in entry-level doctoral student courses at my university, no matter which courses they decided to take in any of the many different departments or professional schools where they situated their work, and to make the resources of my university available to them in a way that could help them to make the transitions that they needed to make in the 9 months that they had with us. Most of them took out big student loans in order to spend an academic year with us. Our job was to provide something that was worth the money and worth all of the stress that comes with needing to make serious life choices in the midst of nonstop, heavy academic work over the course of 9 months, divided into 3 quarters that go by impossibly fast. Because of my work in this program, I have a lot of experience looking at graduate application dossiers from people who completed solid humanistic undergraduate degrees. That is why I think that we are failing to provide good humanistic education. Each January, my co-director and I read, discussed, commented upon around 850 application dossiers. Each of us read each of them. Each of us wrote comments for each of them. We did all the work of admissions for this program. About 600 of the 850 dossiers were referrals from 19 of the doctoral programs in the humanities division. The dossiers came with notes from the departmental admissions committees explaining why the applicant wasn't ready for doctoral work and why the department thought that 1 more year of study could make a big difference. In those 600 files, I learned a lot about how we fail even our strongest undergraduates. Those files were from applicants who were so committed to their undergraduate work that they wanted to pursue doctoral degrees in their fields. And no department referred applicants who were so weak that they would be completely incapable of meeting our expectations for graduate coursework in the disciplines, since every department recognized that the students they referred to the MA program would likely end up in departmental graduate courses the very next year. And if they refer a student, they should expect to meet that student in a classroom the following year. In short, these were application files from good students with solid undergraduate degrees in humanistic disciplines from a wide range of academic institutions, huge range. Ivy League schools, small liberal arts colleges, big state schools, the whole gamut, most from North America, but not all of them. And none of the referrals were, from the point of view of the departments, adequately prepared for doctoral work. Now, mind you, this is not what bothers me about the state of humanistic inquiry in higher education. Humanistic disciplines have become so highly specialized and so professionalized that it is no wonder that very good undergraduates look like very poor candidates for doctoral admissions. Just explaining to art history students the number of non-English languages they needed to know well enough to read clearly in order to get into a top program, you get a sense of what it is, how high the expectations are, and how little the undergraduate programs are prepared to give the students what they would need to go on like that. No wonder. What bothers me is that we were neither succeeding in giving our best students sort of pre-professional preparation, nor in giving them a kind of education that could equip them for leading more prudent and pleasant and meaningful lives. My concern about the life questions have next to nothing to do with concern over professionalization in an academic discipline. The departmental concerns over undergraduate preparation for doctoral work, on the other hand, had everything to do with contemporary hyper-specialization and professionalization. We were not managing to do either thing especially well. We weren't treating this like professional training, and we weren't treating it like an education that should equip people to live well. I conclude that we are failing. And I think that the end of training them to live fuller, richer, better, more meaningful lives is by far and away the more important concern. You aren't going to hurt anybody, no matter what profession she wants to go into, by giving her that sort of an education. The pre-professional stuff, you can pick that up. This other stuff, you have to have it in you to bring to it so much as a decision to pursue advanced degrees, postdoctoral degrees, postgraduate degrees, sorry. My co-director and I composed our incoming class as best we could from this applicant pool. We had enough positive returns on offers of admission to greet a cohort of 115 to 140 graduate students each autumn I was in the program. We had them for one academic year. They had us for the same amount of time. And amazingly, it worked. The program brought in so much money for the humanities division that no one interfered with us. The students formed such a powerful, joyful, and hard-working community in each year's cohort that our alumni events routinely attract more people than any other alumni events at my university. Our alumni email listserv has become one of the primary places where major area businesses and cultural organizations advertise jobs. There is a small but successful group of alumni writers and artists who are very active in Chicago now. They just started a new journal and a program partnering with area urban schools in arts education. It was amazing. It was amazing, okay? Now, people in the regular departments and in the higher administration thought that we were doing magic tricks in the MA program. The provost took to greeting me like I was some sort of weird, charismatic witch that people would just follow anywhere somehow. There were no tricks. We did three things that made all the difference. We worked very hard. We fostered genuine community in the program, and we gave a core course the likes of which our students and staff had never seen. The core course opened the resources of the larger university to our students. The community and the work ethic helped our students take advantage of those resources. I'm going to focus on the core course since I take it that the really tough questions about humanistic education concern how to combine the task of teaching content of various kinds, treatises, dialogues, novels, poems, works of art, films, scholarly articles, what have you, with teaching some skills that allow students to make better use of the content they are given, and with an orientation that allows them to see that whole package as something that's done in the service of something else, of opening up for serious discussion and exploration, a series of great big question marks about human life and human community and suffering and injustice and justice and struggle. In the core course, we used excerpts from important books to teach 3 kinds of interrelated skills at once: reading skills, skills in assessing and making arguments, and skills in finding novel ways of framing and formulating questions. But what mattered more than the specific texts from which we took excerpts, or even the insistence that our students read for, write, and assess arguments seen as addressed to questions at the core of human life, was our basic orientation to the material on that insanely ambitious syllabus. We approached each thing we read as a serious attempt to think around, with, or through questions that none of those texts answered entirely satisfactorily. We read with the understanding that each reading took some of its shape and force from the way in which it opened, saw, or addressed questions about how to understand the challenges individuals and communities face, about what counts as living well, about human life. That is, we treated the entire core course as a focused confrontation with and meditation on a series of increasingly difficult questions of a kind that used to be at the center of moral philosophy. And even though we did not treat any of the things we read as offering an entirely satisfactory answer to the questions it helped us to see and feel and appreciate, we read with the understanding that each of them had some kind of insight to offer us in how to frame such questions, in how to experience them in very different kinds of textual contexts, basically, oriented to different specific issues. And we worked on the understanding that showing due respect for ourselves, each other, and those texts required operating as though, even though we couldn't give clear, straight answers to those questions yet, the questions were answerable, and that the kind of thing we were doing would help equip you to answer them. That used to be what moral philosophy was about, as near as I can tell. It hasn't been about that for a very long time. It disappeared from the field before I entered it. Accordingly, training in highly specialized and professionalized Anglophone moral philosophy did not help me teach the core course. And I had to warn a lot of our students who wanted to situate their work in the philosophy department that the core course was not going to help them with their philosophy-specific disciplinary professional projects. If they had majored in philosophy as undergraduates, they already knew how to read for and write arguments, so they didn't need that from us. Further, if they were exploring the possibility of doctoral work in philosophy, they were not going to get help in their efforts to professionalize themselves from having read some Hegel with us, or some Heidegger, or worse yet, some Marx or Freud or Althusser or Gramsci or Lacan in most of the powerful North American philosophy departments, no one thinks that there is anything philosophically interesting about any of those figures. And they tell you to just not apply if you're interested in those things, and you go on the Harvard website, it's like, just don't apply. Just don't apply. And how we were using them, that's even more remote from the way that disciplinary philosophy tends to conduct itself these days than that list of names and readings. That was the philosophy piece. But you could maybe, on the surface of things, contrast this with the larger world of academic humanistic inquiry in any other region of the humanities or of the humanistic social sciences, at least at Chicago. Just having worked on those readings would help. And having worked on those readings in this way, as though they were about the difficulty in so much as figuring out how to ask serious questions, as though those questions are still very much alive for us, as though the attempt to address them was vitally important, even if none of the readings answered them satisfactorily. This was useful too, even though the style of inquiry was as foreign to an ethnomusicologist or scholar of early modern English literature as it was to a disciplinary philosopher. We were not able to give our students standard graduate training in any of the work we read in the core course. Nowadays, when the standards for scholarship in advanced humanistic research have gone sky high, no one could teach that core course from a position of scholarly mastery. I have never met the human being who could do that. Some kind of scholarly mastery is required in graduate work throughout the humanities and humanistic social sciences these days, and we could not help our students with that in the core curriculum. But that doesn't mean that we couldn't do something important for students in, say, South Asian studies, or policy studies, or cinema, or classics, or English literature, or. The only way we had to teach our core course was by struggling to work with difficult material that had been tremendously influential outside philosophy departments. We showed our students what it was like to approach the material seeking insight, wisdom about some crucial aspect of human life, on the understanding that we were not and did not aspire to be scholarly masters of the material that we read. We suggested, sometimes out loud, but always implicitly, that the reason that this work had been influential was precisely because of the way that it helped to open and formulate serious questions about human life. We modeled what it was like to love this kind of reading and discussion, to demand that the readings speak to human struggle, and to demand that we figure out how to think in our readings, with our readings, through our readings, rather than just about our readings. We needed their ways of thinking and seeing. We needed to try them on in order to be in a position to appreciate what they had to offer us. And that task is really different from writing about a reading. Accordingly, we were able to discuss what was at stake in these readings in a way that had almost nothing to do with the kind of work normally done in graduate courses in the humanities and humanistic social sciences, at least at Chicago. Instead, working with our excerpts, we used the core course to, in effect, make one single 10-week-long big argument. The purpose of the single big argument was to develop an internal critique of some aspects of liberal common sense. We wanted internal critique, not just criticism. For us, there was an important distinction between the two. In a critique, you remain indebted to and continue to rely upon the framework you are questioning as you question it. Criticism can just be very sophisticated trashing. In critique, you don't even bother unless you already owe a debt to the thing you're trying to critique. And the way you do the critique gestures to that ongoing debt that survives even any specific criticism that you make. For us, this was a crucial aspect of giving what we took to be training in critical thinking. You work with material that you take very seriously. You work with material that you owe certain things to. You work with it in a spirit of reverence for all that it is for you, and you keep alive your critical faculties in doing so. And that means you have to be prepared to be at least that much implicated in the things you find unsatisfactory in your object of critique. In that core course, this was the sense in which we taught critical thinking. Excuse me. We used the core course to conduct a critique of liberal common sense. We started with things like this. A speaker of English 500 years ago would not have made much sense to her fellow speakers if she complained that the fact that she was female and Jewish shouldn't make any difference to her prospects in life. There wasn't a world that had a place for that kind of a point to be made. So we took it that that kind of aspect of liberal common sense, the deep egalitarianism of it, somehow counted as genuine moral progress in common sense. But there were all kinds of things connected to liberal common sense, especially the sort of godless variety, although I didn't use that word in that class, that need to be taken with a grain of salt. These kinds of very important, serious moral insights tend to come to us packaged up with other things that don't seem to shed the same kind of light or have the same kind of power or be in the same way responsive to the dignity of the human being. Okay. So that's what we did. And that was how we taught students to recognize that the questions that they had about life echoed and reverberated through the material that we read, and that these were ongoing questions, that it was important to keep pieces of them open while taking other parts of them to be settled. And the results were so deeply affirming. At the beginning of any academic year in the MA program, about 60% of the students wanted to use their year to explore the possibility of doing doctoral work in a humanistic discipline. A big part of those were people who had been referred from the doctoral programs, but there were also direct applicants who wanted to use the year that way. By graduation time in June, only about 20% of that initial group of would-be doctoral students wanted to go on and do doctoral work in a humanistic discipline. But now that group had a sense of purpose. There was a reason why they wanted to do graduate work in a humanistic discipline. and they had seriously considered doing something else instead, in a program where that was never a strike against you. Everybody's making transitions. You get to demand that the field you enter answer to your need to lead a meaningful life. That's what the university's supposed to help you find out. Right? The rest had changed direction. Some, partly inspired, interestingly, by that core course, and deeply impressed by the contrast between that course and their other graduate courses, realized that what they wanted wasn't to do academic research, they wanted to teach. They wanted to teach in a way that made a material difference in the lives of their students. They wanted to teach humanistically. They tended to find tenure-track jobs in two-year colleges in the area. They worked really hard building strong relations with the community colleges. You can study the humanities in the community colleges in our area, and it's required of any students who understand themselves as using the two-year degree as preparation for a four-year degree. So you're catching them just as they're moving toward transfer. Many of those alumni now have tenure. Many of them have won large competitive grants for curricular development at their colleges. They're out there doing things. It's pretty inspiring. A lot of them keep in touch. And their institutions have been so impressed with their work that these community colleges now tend to hire graduates from that MA program over sort of disappointed and bitter failed PhDs, their usual applicant pool. Others wanted to go on and work in finance, law, government, or politics. It may be just a special weirdness of this MA program, but some of our strongest relationships were with very large businesses, financial institutions specifically. What they ended up saying to me about it was, you know what? We need people who can formulate questions well. We need people who can see a situation in a number of different ways, and we need people who can do that kind of conceptual work without losing focus on the central good at issue here. That's what your graduates are learning, seem to have learned how to do. So, I got some of my alumni still have really good jobs with, Goldman Sachs and stuff, who recruited them out of this MA program. It's not, no marketable skills. It's like, well, in a market where most interesting jobs have that shape, these are highly marketable skills, especially combined with the orientation to the serious good in the middle of it all. Otherwise, you've just got juggling tricks and different ways of saying and describing things. But that's not what these guys have. Many of these alumni have been very successful. A lot of them are in area cultural institutions. A huge number of administrative offices at the University of Chicago are now run by my graduates. They sort of, the whole of the development office, for instance, the associate dean of students, all these people are the five main people who coordinate all of the technology for the humanities division. They're all students from these programs. So are a whole lot of directors of education programs at major art museums and things like that. They've gone on to do a lot of different kinds of things. And I am so happy about that, because when I started that MA program, the job description sounded kind of impossible. Like, you've got here, make an MA program that will do this. You will routinely attract more than 100 students a year who will go deeply into debt for the sake of getting an MA in the humanities. And give them something that's worth that. But it also sounded like a real possibility to work in a different way in higher education. And if it hadn't been the case that I've got enough ambition in moral philosophy that I wanted some time to write, I probably would still be running that MA program, because there was nothing like it for just feeling good the minute you arrived at work every day. Thank you all.
We'd like to invite questions from the audience. There are microphones here and here, so just please come up and maybe say who you are and your institutional affiliation.
I thought you were first in line. Hi, I'm Dan Spinello from Notre Dame. I'm a graduate student in philosophy. And I asked my question with profound embarrassment because I finally know that you know just how bad my application to University of Chicago philosophy program was.
Unless you got referred to math in the year that I was in math, I wouldn't have seen it. I was director of graduate studies for 3 years, but we don't have anything to do with admissions.
Okay, well, I did.
These were not bad applications. That's the point. These were good students. We wanted them.
After hearing your talk, what you described sounded very much like what I want, what I do to be. And you mentioned that what you teach, or what you taught at the time, does not really professionalize students for doctoral work in philosophy.
Right.
I guess my first reaction to that is so much the worse for doctoral programs in philosophy.
I agree.
Okay. That was the whole question.
I agree. It doesn't mean that you can't survive one of them and demand exactly this, all the way through, all the way out, and in the classroom with your students. I just, in my head, there are two separate tasks that I do with my doctoral students. One of them is a professionalization task. You've got to have read these things. You need a footnote here. You need an argument here. What if this person objected this way? That whole set. And then there's, what's the point of it all? And it had better be something to do with the true, the good, or the beautiful.
Hi, thank you very much for those words. I'm Adam Pulsar. I'm at the University of Oklahoma, graduate PhD program here at Baylor in philosophy. And you said some things that struck a chord with me because of my experience here in the PhD program, which was colored in many ways by the rich community that we had in
Yes.
that program here. And you said that one of the important things that you were able to build in the MA program was the community. But then it wasn't clear to me what role you thought the community played in achieving the goals that you were able to achieve. So I wonder if you might just say a bit more about the role that the community played.
It's completely vital. The program would have been unthinkable without that. This group of students at the University of Chicago is required to do more work in a shorter period of time under more difficult circumstances than any other group of entering graduate students at the university, in the humanities division at least. They're also trying to make big life changes. And they need The situation is one in which is frequently individually overwhelming, but it's collectively doable. And building a climate in which there's tremendous support, joy, and respect for one another, and a tendency to, and an understanding that everybody's under a whole lot of pressure, and that everybody is going to feel overwhelmed sometimes, but that's what the rest of us are there for. We're there to help, we're there to support, we're there to be part of making this a communal effort in higher learning. That's completely vital. We could not have imagined. We had social hours every Friday that went to, in particularly good years, the students would have a skit night once a quarter where they would like a talent show. Like if one of them played piano, he'd play piano for everybody. They would make up all of these very short plays where they would caricature me, and they were really funny. I learned some of my own annoying mannerisms by watching students imitate me in comedy skits about how sort of ridiculous I was in some ways. But they were great. They were just great. And so we ate together, we had beers together, we talked together, lots of office hours, and the large class was divided into these 11 student big precept groups that were all headed up by an ABD, all but dissertation, doctoral student in one of the disciplines, very, very talented one, and those little precepts became the building blocks for the larger community. They had discussion sections together in the core. They had outings together, all kinds of things. But you couldn't have done this program without the community. It was just too much work for everybody otherwise.
Professor Vogler, thank you for your comments and for the vulnerability that you displayed as you were sharing them with us. I wonder if you might talk about the 20% of students who went forward in the PhD programs, and if that ended up maybe stirring the pot of the programs that they went into, the demands that they made in terms of the kinds of questions they asked. And did you find at all that your influence could be passed on to other professors? Because I think that's one of the goals that we want to try to achieve is it's not just impacting students, but we have to encourage other professors to teach in this.
It's about students who went on to doctoral programs. A lot of them, about twice a week, I get email from somebody. Once a week, I get email from somebody who has found some new way to use material we did in the core, or who wants to tell me that, she just started teaching her first independent course in this doctoral program, and she's structuring it this way because of the way we did, and it's working really well. And her faculty supervisors are taking note of that and thinking that she's an unusually gifted teacher. And she said, do you think that they say that? This was this week's. Do you think that they say that because they'd rather not be responsible for changing their ways? Like they act like this is some special gift instead of just a different way of paying attention? And it's like, I'm afraid that's often what they do. They'll act like it's extraordinary virtue when you're sort of doing your job. But so they are out there, they are doing things, they're very active, and the thing is they have enough sense of themselves and what they're doing and why that I think they can survive whatever sort of training they're getting as sort of intact and pretty viable human beings, which is good. In terms of influencing other faculty, the real awfulness of this MA program was that the thing could thrive as long as you had two faculty who were basically willing to feed it their lives by the bucket full all the time. I mean, just the admissions season, which was a month long, I would come home every night with one of those great big plastic mail kind of container boxes that was just jam-packed full of applications. And I'd spend all night reading those and commenting on them and then get another set every single night and do that. You could not have had young children and done the job in the way that we were doing it. And that kind of, I mean, it was really a lot of work. You had to be in residence all year long because there's all this work you had to do in the summer and stuff. And so that work actually did have an impact on a lot of the faculty around us, and certainly on a lot of the administrators around us. I mean, there were good reasons that they wanted our students, our alumni, to come work with them. They wanted something of whatever was going, they wanted what was happening in that program to be happening in other parts of the university. So there was certainly that. But because of the way we did it, that wasn't an institutionally sustainable model. I mean, just get people who will love this, even if it half kills them, is not a good enough thing. So now they've got an admissions committee, they've got a different kind of director, the core course is no longer the same kind of thing. There are still a lot of alumni around, but mostly they really lament what it was, because it was valuable.
You may have answered the question I was going to ask, which is, how did you prepare the people who were going to teach
That we're going to
this program?
Oh, it was just the two of us. There was only one course that was required of all these students. That was the core course. So, well, we spent all summer reading, and then we went back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. And the way that we co-taught was, for most sessions, like I would write a piece of a lecture, and then my co-director would write the next piece, and then I would write the piece after that, and then he'd write the piece after that, and we'd put it back and forth like that. All the way through, or we divided each lecture instead of making one person have sole responsibility for a lecture, because the thought was that the interaction and dialogue between the two of us as we were working on this material was one of the things that we needed to be able to model for our students. So I mean, it winds up being, it was a lot of work, but it was really worthwhile, I felt.
I'm Mike Beatty here at Baylor.
Yep.
Good to see you, Professor Vogler, again. Thank you so much for your remarks. You indicated that on the basis of the students that you're looking at, humanities and undergraduate institutions are favorable.
It looks that way from my seat in the MA program. It was very, very disturbing.
What would you say to us here at Baylor and other institutions about what we can do to revive the humanities programs in our own institutions?
Well, I actually thought that you're blessed with being in a Christian institution. And in that sense, the kind of suggestions that were being made about Christian humanism and redeveloping Christian humanism at the center of humanities education in the panel discussion this afternoon, that seemed very, very powerful. And I have to say that having talked to you all and listened to your students and seen you, my sense is that you are not failing your students here. I mean, you guys are, that it seems to me that you're giving a good education and that people are getting a good education. That's based on talking to your students, and very used to talking to students from lots of different places. Yours are good, and not just good, but they've got some shape to that goodness. It's not just they've got a whole lot of skills and they've got a whole lot of things that they know and they want to know more and have more skills and they're otherwise a little disoriented. That's not the impression I've gotten from talking to your students here. Quite the reverse. So I would say whatever it is that you're doing in these classrooms, pat yourselves on the back. Keep doing it, because it's as long as you, part of it is just operate from the faith that the material that you're teaching that has helped you live has exactly the same resources for your students as it had for you. Trust your students to be human beings kind of like you are, who actually need this stuff. And as a young teacher, I felt so inadequate and so underprepared so much of the time that I realized that I was just going to be stuck in a world where I had no choice but to just go with the things that had made my life important, had been influential, had helped me think, had helped me appreciate something about where I lived and how. And I was just going to have to assume that all those terrifying strangers I was going to greet in these classrooms were like me in that sense. This could be useful to them too. The things that helped me figure out something about life will likely help them figure out something about life too, because we're all human beings. That sort of thing.
One thing is thank you, Professor Candace Vogler.